Hello, everyone. This is Officer Cruz. Welcome to today's media availability on April 12, 2022. Thank you for joining us. Just a friendly reminder, please raise your hand if you have any question. Chief, you're welcome to begin.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to be brief today. I want to cover two topics. First, the presentation today, relatively lengthy, but I think containing important information regarding the instances of follow home or follow off bandits. This is a circumstance where we have patrons that are in retail establishments, dining locations, businesses across Los Angeles. It's not any one particular area. But as they go about their day, as they go back to their car or they're on their way home in their car, there's been this instance of where they're being targeted apparently for expensive jewelry, watches, diamond rings, those type of ornaments. And while the department put a task force together some 6 months ago in order to address this phenomenon, and we've made a number of arrests, today's presentation spoke about the fact that this persists and the dangers associated with it. There was 2 videos that were just, in all candor, just examples of the level of violence that we see in these instances, as well as the mob or the group of individuals that are oftentimes involved. For the public, this presentation today was meant to ensure that you understand that the Los Angeles Police Department has dedicated substantial resources in a task force configuration involving a number of agencies across this region to identify those responsible and bring them before the criminal justice system. And that pursuit will continue. Second area here was to identify to local businesses who may see these patterns or series of events that have occurred near or at their locations, is to work with us, work with the police department, and we'll work with you to understand what some of the MOs or modus operandi, what some of the tales or tips that we believe can help us identify those responsible. These are instances that we don't believe are spontaneous. We believe many times these offenders are scouting out locations, sending up advance people, may even have relationships with parking valets or store employees. We're not clear on that. So it's important that the business owners and operators work with the department in recognizing that this phenomenon is occurring. It's occurring in the San Fernando Valley, on the west side of the city, in the downtown area. No area is unique or been protected from this occurrence. So work with us, and we'll work with you. And we think that working together, we can counter this terrible and brazen acts of violence. Lastly, the victims themselves. While I'm not encouraging anyone to not wear their watches and jewelries, I am encouraging you to be mindful that this is occurring. And it has persisted now for more than 6 months, going on a year. And we're concerned that the temperament of the offenders that are involved in this has not been changed by the enforcement efforts taken to date. So being mindful of your surroundings, walking in areas with pairs, and recognizing that if you are accosted in such a fashion, that there's no item of property that's worth your life. The issue of struggling or fighting to retain a watch or a piece of jewelry is not worth it. We have seen a murder associated with this, with these follow-up bandits. Actually, we've seen 2. And so we know that propensity for violence is ever present. The second area I want to cover today is today we released to the Board of Police Commissioners for their review and placed online at LAPD online the 2021 end-of-year use of force report. This report identifies the instances where officer-involved shootings occurred over this past year, calendar year of 2021, as well as all reportable uses of force. And in this hundreds of pages of document, it pulls those each of those instances apart and gives identity as far as the makeup of the offender, the makeup of the of officers that were involved in this, their tenure, their experience, and also as well as the outcome of these use of force investigations. It also identifies patterns and trends for us to adjust our training, to adjust our tools and our tactics so we can pursue the goal of eliminating use of force, particularly deadly force, as we police the city. This past year, we saw 37 officer-involved shootings versus 27 the year before. And the increase was entirely made up of weapons other than firearms. In fact, the number of firearms-related officer-involved shootings You have to go back to 2015 to see that percentage as low as it was this past year. The increase in weapons other than firearms oftentimes involve persons experiencing mental illness, as well as persons who are homeless. And as we looked at the underlying influences of this, we've adjusted our training with our personnel to address issues of alternatives such as less lethal tools and their availability, that they create cover and distance so that officers have more time to safely de-escalate these situations, that they recognize instances of mental health crises and recognize that as they work through that, the areas of the voices that they use, the tone of their communications, so as we can, again, try to safely resolve this. We're also expanding the use of 40 millimeter less lethal munitions, and we've seen that the training over these last few years has increased officers' reliance on that system in place of resorting to deadly force. And so this last year, when that trend changed, we went back to our training to ensure that the force mitigation, that we let it work, that we rely on those systems, that we bring that first and front and foremost in our officers' mind. And then lastly, that our efforts of training needs to be persistent and ongoing, that this is a perishable skill. I'm proud of the donation of the Los Angeles Police Foundation, who contributed more than $1.6 million so the department could acquire a state-of-the-art virtual training facility that is being placed at our academy in our gymnasium, first of its kind on the West Coast, that will allow teams of officers to work around the clock in various training scenarios so that they can gain experience and gain perspective, both in the sense of what it is for a person who's experiencing a mental health crisis, the overload of the sensory systems, and how an officer can go through a virtual reality training session to recognize that while they would believe that raising their voice could help gain a person's attention, in reality, it may escalate a person experiencing auditory sensory overload. That virtual reality training allows us to actually replicate the types of sensory overload that people experiencing mental health crises can incur upon themselves, and allow officers to experience it so that they can adjust their tactics. Also, I'm proud of the work and working with the virtual reality company that they've developed simulations that allow us to de-escalate situations of individuals armed with weapons other than firearms, and use tactics that, working as a team, allow and afford officers their safety, as well as the ability to safely de-escalate and take the person into custody without having to resort to deadly force, and with the hopes of not having to resort to any force. And then lastly, a particular area of concern this last year was we saw on some instances individuals that were self-mutilating, or actually the risk that they posed was to their own life. An officer, in an effort to render aid, escalated the situation and resulted in the use of deadly force, as the officer, in taking and using force options, resulted in the individual then attacking that officer, and the officer having to come to his own defense or her own defense. This training in this virtual reality, I believe, is state of the art and will lead American policing going forward, as we can show young and old officers alike experiences that allow them to safely work through those scenarios, and then tactically debrief and actually watch themselves in retrospect and understand what areas that they could improve upon, and strategies and options that are available to them. So I'm thankful for the foundation providing this, because as we know, scenario-based training and adult learning is critical as you pick up those new added skill sets and perspective, but it's also expensive. This training allows us to use avatars and to work in the team setting and not be tied to a calendar or the limitations of only having so many actors, quote unquote, available to act as other members of our training scenarios. With that, I'll conclude my remarks and happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Chief. Our first question comes from Phil Shuman. Please go ahead with your question. Mr. Shuman, you can go ahead with your question, sir.
Hi, Chief. Thank you. Today, a lot of focus on what happened in Brooklyn on the subway. I know your people increased your presence on the metro, but realistically speaking, can anything be done to safeguard against the kind of scenario we saw in Brooklyn this morning?
Well, we are continuing to get updates across the course of the day relative to the attacks that occurred there. And let me say that, as I said this morning, our thoughts and prayers go out to the family members and to the survivors of this, and to all of Brooklyn, as their confidence and their safety is shaken by such an attack. I'm proud of our work with MTA, or Metropolitan Transit Authority, with our men and women that are working on top of the train stations, as well as on the platforms, and are riding in our mass transit, both bus and rail. I'm proud of the security systems with the security professionals that are there. I'm also aware that we use both seen and unseen tactics and techniques to counter these type of threats. But you're right, any system that has hundreds of thousands of participants every single day is vulnerable. And what's critically important is that when we look at the aftermath of these events and the pursuit of identifying those responsible and bringing them to the criminal justice system, we'll pull this apart and likely find that this individual or individuals that are involved in this had involved themselves in behavior that offered tips or leads of them either planning or contemplating such an attack. So see something, say something has been a national theme for now 2 decades. And it speaks to the fact that whether it's domestic terrorism, foreign terrorism, or just or an active shooter with expressing a grievance, that these behaviors are typically not spontaneous, that there's a pre-planning stage. And while that pre-planning stage has shortened in more recent times, that oftentimes, and if not the majority of times, there are family members, friends, and others that said, you know, I thought something was up, didn't know what to do, and I wish I would have called the authorities. So what I just asked for Angelenos to know is that we did increase the presence. We will continue that for the foreseeable future, recognizing that part of this phenomenon also is that there may be an individual or individuals who feel that this is some type of calling or some type of signal to them that they should act out. So we want to increase our vigilance, be mindful, not be paranoid. There is no credible or any specific information that LA was a target of this or have any other associated risks today. But our men and women are out there, our added canines are out there, they'll continue. And again, we just ask the traveling public to recognize that we're there for their safety and we're there to build their confidence in the safety of the system. And again, if they see something, say something, bring it to an officer's attention, call 911. This is information that we want and need. If they're wrong, if they misinterpret a situation, that's okay. I'd rather be safe than sorry.
Our next question comes from Gabriel Huerta from KVEA Telemundo 52. The question reads as follows. Chief Moore, the police commission reports today that 5 home robberies were reported in Los Angeles in the last 48 hours, marking a rebound in the trend that had previously declined in 78%. What could you tell us about this problem, and what recommendation would you give the residents to prevent these crimes?
So as I said earlier, that we're aware that an initial surge of these events that came onto our radar screen in 2021, scenarios of people being followed off of retail establishments, of restaurants and other locations, and being targeted for their high-end expensive jewelry. That was something we hadn't seen in decades. And we did form a task force to identify and pursue those responsible, and we made a series of arrests. And our cases continue to build, and we have further suspects that we have identified that we're building further casework against in order to present criminal filings and resulting in their arrest. The last 48 hours has been troubling in that we've seen this surge, if you will, of these instances, and in the same MO. Our work will continue, that the task force will continue its work, as well as additional surveillance resources from our Metropolitan Division, our Gang Narcotics Division, and local area detectives in order to be a set of eyes and ears in our community, so that we're not just doing follow-up investigations in the aftermath, but we're prowling the streets. Also know that the men and women of LAPD and our uniform resources also have descriptions and video and photographs of vehicles that have been used recently, as well as individuals we believe may be responsible, or at least images of those individuals, so that their eyes and ears and their investigative stops can help the investigation identify those responsible. The individuals that are responsible for this to date have been individuals that have had frequent and ongoing contacts with the criminal justice system. They're dangerous individuals. They represent a real threat to our safety. And this department is committed to working with our business leaders, working with our residents community to turn the tide on this and to stop this series. To the member of the public who would wish us to go out tonight to dinner, to go shopping in a mall, we ask you to do so. Don't allow these instances to dissuade you from that. But at the same time, act responsibly. Walk in pairs. Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of people who are drawn to you in a suspicious manner. And ensure that as those circumstances happen, that you take care of yourself, you protect yourself. And certainly, if you are a victim of such a crime, to be your eyes and ears, gather as much of information as you can, so that when officers respond and we're there to help and protect you, you can give as much information as possible to help us identify those responsible.
Our next question comes from Steve Gregory. Steve, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chief. Good afternoon. A couple questions. One, regarding the MTA and the security, can you give us an idea, or if you have the number, how many of your officers are actually working that detail?
We have more than 140 officers that work in any day of the week. Today, we're surging that with some additional officers just to increase the added visibility. We've also surged the number of explosive canine teams that are there. This is an organization that has some flex capabilities to it, and we can change our makeup, if you will, our appearance to meet these short-term needs. But I won't give the exact details or the exact numbers, obviously, but
Sure.
Just suffice it to say that we have surged, and we will, through the course of today, we'll continue to evaluate this as we go into the evening into tomorrow.
Well, and I'm kind of looking broader picture, not just this event, but because what I'm getting at is, doesn't the LAPD have a specific jurisdiction in which to patrol, or are you spread out through the entire system?
Well, no, we have a contract with the MTA for all metro lines in the city, as well as their bus. So rail and bus for the MTA is our responsibilities in the state limits. And we have dedicated personnel at Union Station, at 7th and Figueroa, at various red line stations and other stations. And then we also have dedicated resources that ride the trains themselves. We put additional personnel on buses. Now the buses number in the hundreds, and so we're not on every bus by any stretch of the means. But we do strategically move those resources, like I said, more than 140 shifts a day here in the city of Los Angeles, and we do use that crime analysis, and we do evaluate trends and patterns to determine where is the best locations for those resources to be deployed. In addition, today we directed our patrol units in the geographic areas to increase their extra patrol around bus stations and rail lines, so that they, again, the added visibility to give some reassurance to a traveling public who may be a bit on edge with the circumstances that occurred in Brooklyn today.
And looking down the line a bit, the MTA and the Metro Board are reevaluating law enforcement's role on the system now, and they don't want an armed presence. I wondered if you had an opinion on that one way or another. That I've read the report that came out of the Metro Board, and they want to phase out armed law enforcement. Are you hearing the same thing, and are you prepared for that? And what's your opinion on it?
Well, there have been some advisory committee reports that have talked about the role of law enforcement and this matter of public safety and what is the appropriate calibration. Let me be clear. I firmly support that a metro rail, metro buses are improved. The safety of the operators, safety of the traveling public are improved by the presence of Los Angeles police officers. I also firmly believe that there's a security workforce that needs to be there that are unarmed, that are there to deal with quality of life issues, customer complaints, fair use of fare evasion, and so forth. So it's not just the Los Angeles Police Department isn't the sole solution. It's a solution of having an armed presence, having police officers with the authority, training, and capabilities of dealing with acts of violence, with attacks, with people who would be preyed upon by others. But it also requires layers of security officers, as well as systems, monitoring systems, camera systems, checks and balances as to the code of conduct itself, as to the safety and security of these transportation lines. So it's a complex operation. Transportation networks are critical infrastructure to the safety of our society, and LAPD absolutely has a role in ensuring and augmenting the safety of those lines through the presence of our people.
The sheriff has sent out an advisory saying that tomorrow at 11 a.m. there will be a major announcement regarding the MTA system. Do you have any idea what that's about?
The sheriff and I have not had an opportunity to talk today. Unfortunately, I've been with commission. I'm not aware of any major announcements that he might have.
Okay. My other question then, my final one is about, you were talking about the follow home robberies and the rise in crime and whatnot. You know, and detectives that I talk with from Wilshire and other divisions, the frustration that they have is that the crimes continue to rise, but they're finding that a lot of times these brazen crimes are done because they know there's no consequences. What is the commitment you have with the district attorney's office here? Because one doesn't really work without the other. And if there's continues to be, no consequences for those actions, those crimes are going to continue to spike.
So I work with District Attorney Gascon as his role as a prosecutor of these cases. We talk regularly about what I believe is the value of enhancements for the use of a firearm, particularly the use of a firearm by an individual who's demonstrated prior violence and gang membership. There are special enhancements both at the time of the booking of that individual as well as through the prosecution in sentencing. I do hear from our detectives as well as others that there's a sense, a perception that there's a lack of accountability. I think that's been brought on by a lot of different factors. One has been perhaps, one has been, I believe, some earlier statements relative to the use or lack of the use of enhancements prohibiting it. And I'm encouraged by DA Gascon's movement on and changing some of his earlier directives to ensure that those enhancements are brought back. I also believe this is a consequence of the justice system that has been significantly impacted by the pandemic. Let's be clear, we've had trials and we've had court deliberations that have been deferred for months. Individuals that have been arrested and released on either bail or zero bail, no bail, to be called back months and months from now. And they go and reoffend. And while there have been instances where we've been able to have that person get an enhanced bail, many other instances in which a court later releases a person on their own recognizance and a court date that is going to be still months away. I think that process is counter to the need for a criminal justice system to be viewed as a deterrent for those that engage in crime and a deterrent for those that would want to engage in crime or be tempted to because there's a belief or perception amongst some in their community that there's a lack of consequences. So we're all in this together. This isn't me putting arrows in any one aspect of the criminal justice system. And I hear our people clearly, and I have and will speak and continue to speak to instances in which I think that enhancements and or the courts themselves have fallen short, as I did last week, where we have an individual who was arrested a number of times and continually released back out to the community as a result of other parts of the criminal justice system not viewing it with the same lens that I am.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you all for your questions. It looks like that is the last question for today. Chief, do you have any final thoughts?
Nope. Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Chief,
Bye-bye.
thank you for your time. This concludes our media availability for today. Thank you everyone for attending and participating. We will keep you updated as to the next available Zoom meeting. Have a good rest of your day.